up to day one of the event, which starts at 10. By 1 o'clock, there was nobody there. I was dying. It was so, honestly, but it was very much kind of calm on the surface and then kind of, frantically paddling underneath. So have you done this before? Have you been given, £50,000 by a client to do X, Y, and Z?
After the setback of that failure, it often sits near a breakthrough.
You should always be bold and you should always try things and push for things, but you should also do your research.
You can bring all that sort of small failures that when you get onto a bigger thing, you're actually like, miss that pitfall.
Yes, you might have done a pitch. Yes, you might have presented some ideas. They were buying into you. They're buying into the anecdotes that you were giving them, the experience about how you dealt with other situations. It's okay to say no. When I came into my no era, I found that I was navigating the world more easily and I was happier, really. A brand is not a logo or a name. A brand is a feeling. It's a shared experience.
Some people build brands. Some people build culture. And then there's today's guest, whose career hasn't followed a straight line, more like one of those late-night bus routes that takes us somehow through fashion weeks, global campaigns, and the occasional crisis. He's gone from building PR agencies straight out of uni, to creating early viral moments on YouTube, to running global campaigns for brands like Reebok, Adidas, and Y. A journey that's shaped by culture, chaos, creativity, and a few wonderfully humbling moments along the way. But behind the big names sits someone who's always tuned into what actually moves people long before brand purpose became a trend. Welcome to the podcast, Ryan.
Thank you very much for having me. And what a fantastic introduction. I couldn't have written it better myself. Thank you.
Thank you. So before all the global campaigns, the cultural conversations and the brand work and the roller coaster of life, what actually got you started before this industry got a hold of you?
I am the product of a Irish mother, white Irish mother, and a Black Jamaican father. And this fusion of culture and, the eventual creation of me being mixed race played out throughout my kind of career and my life as it is. And I'm sure we'll talk about that later. But I grew up in Milton Keynes, now a sprawling city, but back then it was a very small town. And I went to very Catholic schools. So my world was pretty small, and even my extended family was pretty small. I spent time with the Irish family in Lincolnshire, and we didn't really travel, or certainly not outside of the UK when I was younger. We spent a lot of time in Butlins and campsites. So yeah, I at the start of my life was very small, I would say. And as I progressed throughout my school career and education, I just felt, and I think it happens I think some people have it and they don't. But I just felt this urge to get out and see the world. At the same time, my elder sister was very much into the rave scene. So, I sit there and creep into her bedroom while she was with her friends practicing her rave moves before they went out. I just thought they were so cool. I mean, the guys had curtains, the haircuts, it was like the curtain haircuts. Everyone was wearing Reebok, sovereign rings, and probably doing things they shouldn't. They were listening. They had like posters of like Dreamscape and Helter Skelter and bomber jackets. And I couldn't wait to go out. In fact, one of my childhood memories is, as I mentioned, I went to very Catholic schools. I went into school on Monday and the teacher asked, "What did you get up to the weekend, Ryan?" And I said, "I went to a rave. Yeah, I went to Helter Skelter at the sanctuary." It's like, I was like 7 years old. Like, what the hell? But I think that watching that and experiencing that through my sister mixed with my I was one of those kids in the 80s, 90s that was raised by TV. I would sneak down and watch television. And the fact I was in this, small town, all of these things came together to make me feel that there was more out there for me. And I would say that was the very beginning of my interest in culture and finding out how the world works and exploring different lifestyles and different types of people. And that led me on a path to studying business at college, with a little bit of sociology. I don't know if they still do AS levels now. And then that kind of funneled through into university, at which point there were opportunities to go to Farnborough. What else on the list? Bournemouth, I think there was a few others. But and I think it was Stoke-on-Trent, I think the other one. I'm so glad I didn't go to any of those. I went to Manchester, and the first day I landed in Manchester was the first day I'd been to Manchester. Put it that way. And everything I needed in life, everything I thought I was missing, I found in the big city. I found that mix of culture. I found that music and that, all those different variety of scenes. I found the different types of people. I was in a city where there were people who, had all different kinds of complexions, all different kinds of faces, different kinds of language. And I didn't know what I was missing until I was there. So in terms of the pre-career Ryan, that was very much the spark that lit my, my journey through my onward journey, I would say.
Cool. And then obviously after Manchester University, right out of graduating, you went into an agency and started or helped create an in-house PR.
So yes, yes. So I don't spend a lot of time when I talk about my career. I must speak about, my successes or losses, challenges, wins. I sometimes focus on the bigger brands, the bigger moments, but I forget actually the smaller roles and the opportunities that formed me, but that actually weren't that small. So during my sandwich year at uni, a free streetwear brand in London, and best times. I mean, interning when you're living at home, you're getting paid a wage. I mean, I was richer than I've ever been. I don't think they exist now. Sorry to everybody studying; it's not my fault. But I made a lot of contacts, and I think that's something that we were talking before this call about. That introvert extrovert side of me, and I think that extrovert on the extrovert introvert nature of my personality was more extreme in the early days, and it's something that happens as you get older. You focus a little bit more on your brain and how it works, but I was more extrovert, and I think at that young age in that internship, just being really bolshy and staying out with the director drinking and meeting all of these amazing people from the industry really set me up with a great foundation. And that's if anyone is listening who's a student or is starting out in their career, if you get the opportunity to connect with your leadership, to connect with your peers and really put the time in to utilize their networks, it will pay off in the future. So as I said, I made lots of connections during my internship. So when I graduated and left university, I naturally reached out to everybody. And there was this amazing guy called David Mallon who owned this wholesale company. Well, I would say it was a cluster of companies called Red Ink. Within that brand umbrella of brands, they owned Elvis Jesus, they owned Religion, and lots of different fashion brands. And they had a fashion sales agency as part of that group. And I was invited to kind of come on board and essentially create my own in-house PR agency, which was fantastic. And I can't believe now when I look back, this early 20s version of me went into this room with these guys who felt 5 times bigger than me, mainly because they were eating healthily. I was, a student coming out, graduating, just like crazy boozing, non-eating lifestyle. But these felt like these huge guys. I was going into this room and essentially pitching for what I could do for them, how I could grow this agency through PR. And, I formed this in-house PR agency at the Fashion Network, which really focused on regional influencer campaigns back when they were just starting. That ranged everything from partnering with Schweppes Russian, who came to me and said, right, I want all of the soap stars in the north to be drinking Schweppes. So, therefore, I could put a party on in a club in Manchester and I would get all of the Coronation Street cars down, all of Emmerdale, all of Hollyoaks. So lots of that work. And it was a really good time. Had some amazing clients. And I guess one of my fondest memories, or moments, sorry, is actually coming to the realization that I'd completed that circle. So, I was determined not to stay there for too long. And when I felt I got to the point, right, I've done all the great campaigns. I know everybody in Manchester now. I've become, sorry to say everybody, don't cringe too much. I've become a big fish to a small pond. It was time for me to leave. And that would be another piece of advice I would give to everyone. Know when and you can deploy this throughout any stage of life, know when the party has ended, know when it's time to leave. But yeah, it was a great start. I still am friends with lots of people from that time. I learned a lot of lessons. I had a lot of responsibility at a very young age, and it really did set me up for the career that I've had and I'm now having.
And what were the very first, say, the first 3 or 4 months like for you? Was it sort of very calm, collected? You knew where you were going, or there was a lot of sort of,
I think
on the cuff?
I think the kind of analogy of the swan is probably overused, but we're going to stick with it because we haven't got hours for me to think of another one. But it was, yeah, it was very much kind of calm on the surface. I know this, and then kind of, frantically paddling underneath. Lots of kind of being very creative with the truth, I think, in terms of, have you done this before? Have you been given, £50,000 by a client to do X, Y, and Z? Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course I've done that. I've done that in the past. Or, have you designed, a real world strategy for a brand? Oh yeah, I've done that before. Luckily that was back in a time where there was just more money in the industry, and there was more of an urge to try things out. There was more people. There was just more of more. So people were a lot less risk averse. So they would you take a punt on an agency like me. Yes, it was just really trying to not let the veil slip, and for everybody to know that I wasn't this, 20 years in the game, although that would, because it wouldn't look like it, but I wasn't this hardened expert in marketing. I was very green. And I think I did a good job. I convinced a lot of people to spend. So yeah, but that was the main thing. It was trying to ensure that I didn't let it slip that I was a newbie.
Yeah. Which is a lot of pressure in it, but then it probably makes you work harder because you've almost got to keep going and, like you say, not let the mask slip, not let the bravado go, but actually just keep implementing, and then you learn very quickly. So the learning curve is always going up, isn't it?
Yeah, and I immediately started with a workforce. I had interns underneath me. I had press assistants who were part-time. So I not only had to quickly learn how to do the job, I also had to learn how to be a boss and mentor and pass that knowledge down that I'd only just gathered myself. So that was really important, and a significant part of my early growth was learning how to pass that information on, learning how to nurture other people, because through that process, you end up learning a lot yourself. Those moments actually allow you to reflect a lot on what you know, and what you don't know as well.
Yeah. And then leads us quite nicely on. There was that infamous fashion lucid empty moment. Could you
I
take us
think
Take us back to that day? What was it, 23 years old? The silence of an empty room? What was that like?
I think I can talk about this now.
Okay.
So I think it's what it's done. So I had this idea that one of the sales agency would run monthly marketplace events, right? So they would convince, and at the time, Manchester was like drowning in brands, whether it's more established brands like Champion have an office there, or Asics, or it was, startups, or it was retailers like Oi Polloi, which started in Manchester. I said, right, now you're doing these monthly events, these smaller events where essentially these brands were selling their samples or goods they couldn't sell at a discounted kind of a sample sale. I said, right, well, let's make this, rather than keeping it as a very siloed B2B event where we have this mailing list where we're just saying, if you're in the know, you can come and get these brands and these fashion labels at a cheaper price. Let's open it up to the public, and let's create this big sales, moment. It's Manchester. This is going to be really cool. Let's get, make it a food. It's 360 food before people said 360. Integrated. Let's go with integrated. This integrated moment where we've got food, fashion, music, all of the things you could imagine. Everybody loved the idea. We managed to sell it into all of these different retailers and brands. And I said, well, we need to host this inside a big space. So I managed to pitch and get Lucid. I don't know if you know Manchester well, but Lucid, it may not even be called Lucid now, but Lucid was a 3-story club in the Printworks, which is this huge building in Manchester, lots of restaurants and things inside. But it is quite a dark, imposing building. And you walk in there and it's like dark with restaurants and everything in it. So I managed to convince Lucid to have this space. So you've got all these brands turn up and set up their stalls. I've gone to my friends at Capital Radio, it may have been Galaxy then. And again, this was back when you could just give radio hosts clothes and they would just give you a shout out on the radio. I was doing that. I was getting celebrities to talk about it. Because social media, I think it was MySpace
Okay.
MySpace was then, I think Facebook had just come out. I got my friend Linda, hi Linda, if you're listening, who was diary editor at Manchester Confidential, to write a piece about it. Like, I did as much as you could possibly do to inspire the public to come to this event. Cut to day one of the event, which starts at 10. By 1 o'clock, there was nobody there. I was dying. It was so, honestly, you got all these, which I saw as clients looking at me. I just kept walking up and down the stairs. I went and got flyers printed. We were flyering outside. One or two people would walk in and then realize I had to walk down 3 flights of stairs and would just walk straight back out. Food vendors were closing. And this was to be a 3-day event. By day 2, all of the retailers started packing up and leaving. And my boss at the time, Dale, again, a shout out, Dale, if you're listening, he was quite chill about it. He just said, it is what it is. He was also very business about it. He said, they paid us a fee. We may have to, refund some of it, but we've come out of this kind of neutral. But for me, it was a really, really big hit. I took it really personally. And I think that was an example of, you should always be bold and you should always, try things and push for things, but you should also do your research. And I think this is where a lot of people call themselves marketeers, right? Or brand experts. And I think you can be somebody who's very creative and can come up with ideas and, be bold and bend the world through your ads. But you really need to do the analytical, understanding people, culture, places, behavior piece to ensure success. And I think that was an example, as I said, of me being bold, but not actually doing the research and thinking it through. Actually, it's the middle of summer. Do people want to walk into this huge building that is dark, a huge building that they associate with nightclubs, eating, drinking? Do they want to come? And going through the steps, I think I got carried away with the notion of, I'm hosting an event in the Lucid Club. I've been all over the radio, and the ego, and everyone has an ego, and it typically starts young. Hopefully it dies young as well. But yeah, it still pulls on the heartstrings now because I feel for little Ryan, who was running up and down the stairs. But it was a learning. And I guess if anyone is thinking of doing an event like that, do your research, understand your market, understand, maybe I should have gone into some of the stores, understood a bit about their traffic flows, and then ensured I had some RSVPs, maybe put some incentives on, etc. So yeah, that was a painful moment, but I've turned it into a lesson. But thank you for bringing it up. Yeah, thank you.
And then obviously after the setback of that failure, it often sits near a breakthrough. So can we talk about that viral blue hoodie campaign? How did you get that together? And was that sort of a turning point for you or pushed you onto a new trajectory?
So, like with life, ups and downs, ebbs and flows, peaks and valleys. Coming out of the valley, I then entered this peak moment. So, and this opportunity is something that has presented itself to me a few times throughout my career. And it does give me pause for thought sometimes, thinking, should I become an expert in the field I'm about to tell you? But we were approached by another wholesaler in Manchester who was impressed by, I guess, meeting me and some of my credentials, I guess. And again, it's that bolshiness, if that's not too much of a kind of harsh word, of youth that really propelled me into lots of situations. I didn't second guess what I was offering or second guess myself in the room. So this very big fashion wholesaler in Manchester. And for those who don't understand what the wholesaler model is, so this business would essentially make products for brands. Okay, so they would have a factory in India or in China, and they would make products for brands. These could be the products for the brand, or it could be like a white label, and they would stick the label on it. So they didn't actually have their own brand. They would make product for the people. But he was determined to build his own denim brand. And he came to me and he said, we've got this brand and I would love you to kind of promote it here in Manchester. And we produced their kind of campaign materials. I didn't tell anyone. It was like my first solo shoot that I produced. And I actually we recorded behind the scenes of the shoot, and I printed onto DVDs and gave that out. I really wanted to tap into that culture of people trying to, sell like music DVDs and CDs and albums in the street, and which I think was quite cool when I look back on it. And I thought, okay, well, budgets aren't big. we've got this shoot content which goes wherever it's going to go. We've got this kind of guerrilla style DVD moment, but we need something that's a little bit more engaging, right? That's going to engage people who don't want to take a CD off a guy in the street. So I came up with this really simple idea of finding 10 guys, paid them all 50 quid. I whacked on a pair of jeans from said brand. Believe it or not, the brand was called Damaged Jeans, and a blue hoodie from said brand as well. So they didn't just do jeans; they also did other stuff. But you've got to remember, this was the era of like Voy denim and apple bottom jeans and even Sean John. It's quite political. So denim was a very, very, even Victoria Beckham had her own denim line now. So we've got all of these 10 guys in blue hoodies and denim jeans. And I just said, you're just going to walk around the centre of Manchester in linear lines down key kind of thoroughfares and landmarks. So down Canal Street, down Market Street. You're going to walk in and out of Harvey Nicks and Selfridges. If anyone tries to talk to you, don't talk back. And you can actually see in some of the footage, I'm at the front, but you can hear. So anyway, they started to walk around. You can hear people going like, "What you doing? Who do you think you are? You think you are? Do you? You know, look at you. You think you're tough." But it was creating this swirl. You know, people were like, what are these guys? And you could see people were putting up these recordings on YouTube of these guys like in these blue hoodies walking along Piccadilly Gardens. And it was even mentioned on the radio, you know, does anyone know who these guys that are walking around Manchester thinking they were all tough? Because people thought they were a gang, right? Which is wild. I will say that about a year later, I think it was O2, did a very similar thing with black hoodies. Was black t-shirts, and there was like hundreds of people. Don't know where they got that from me, but again, we're going with the ego moment. So yeah, that was a very, you know, I'm very kind of proud of that. Even though when you look back at it, it's very lo-fi. Again, you could see me in the distance directing, but that was then, you know, picked up by an agency in London who reached out to me and said, you know, were you the guy that created this, and I'm not even sure they called it a campaign. I just think they said, did you create this video? And I said, yes. And they invited me down to London to have a chat.
Wow. And if before we move on to the next chapter, in those early parts of your career in the fashion now, what were some of the least glamorous things that still make you laugh today?
Oh God. A lot of it is carrying things. You know, when you are doing, and this is something anybody who's worked in fashion or, you know, events for luxury goods, FMCG goods, it's a lot of carrying. You know, if you're doing events, you've got to carry, it's often carrying a lot of booze from venue to venue or from truck to truck. It's all of the behind the scenes stuff. And I think one of the greatest compliments I've been given in my career is when somebody said, you know, Ryan, you're the last person to leave. You're the first person to pick up rubbish as you're going through an event. Even when I was the boss, tidying up, making sure things are clean. So it's the behind the scenes stuff that people don't see. And because fashion as an industry, actually this kind of a bit of a theme emerging here. It's all smoke and mirrors, but it's all, you know, presentation. The industry presents as very rich and, you know, very full. But actually, it's a lot of people getting paid, you know, an okay wage, living off free samples and events and freebies. So, you know, there isn't a huge amount of money to pay production agencies or large scale production agencies or larger external teams who can come in and actually do. So that's where you really kind of humble yourself. So all of that, the back end stuff, the carrying of things, putting up rails, steaming things, running around, you know, trying to find models, seating people, which can be very awkward because, you know, sometimes you have to take people off their front row seats and sit somebody else there, which can be really awkward. Luckily, I've only had to do that a few times, but I've witnessed some terrible, terrible incidents happening and just thought, thank God it's not me.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's all the stuff that people don't see. And I think there's a reason for that, because without that, it's kind of like the whole Wizard of Oz thing. If people were to see behind the curtain, the whole industry that it kind of is held up on would fall down.
Yeah. And you've alluded just there before we jumped into that question, was London agencies, was that the start of sort of some global brands, fashion weeks?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
you're with looking back at your time with, is it Levi's,
Yeah.
YMC?
Yeah. 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 So before though, so I was really lucky. So I was headhunted by this agency, which at the time was kind of on it in terms of its life cycle, on its kind of it's his dog phase. It was kind of like phasing out a little bit. But it had been very prominent in the 80s. It'd been responsible for launching lots of incredible British fashion designers. And at the time that I was there, it still had some incredible young talent, but also a lot of decent brands like Timberland, Henry Lloyd, Replay Jeans, which I worked on and absolutely loved. Yeah, so as I mentioned, they kind of headhunted me and I started working there. But I was very fortunate that I was there in the last days of kind of the best years of London Fashion Week. So back then, London Fashion Week, and not to bore all of the non-fashion lovers that are listening, I'll be really quick, I promise. London Fashion Week was all centered at Somerset House, okay, which is in London, this beautiful building, and you'd have women's wear. It was when 5 days, women's wear shows would take place in the upstairs, and then downstairs you'd have men's fashion week on the Wednesday, I think, which is always the cool one because it had all the best parties and everything. And again, there was a lot of money going around, and it was the good era. So I was very fortunate to be present during that time, and I represented some incredible designers like Fred Butler, Jaden RVA James, David Comer, who's gone on to do some fantastic work, Dean Quinn. Bad story about Dean Quinn. I do feel guilty. I sent some of his really delicate beaded suits for women to a Britney Spears shoot, and it all came back crushed. And he was very angry. That was another lesson. That was another lesson learned. He was like, "You've destroyed my entire collection." I was like, "Actually, it was Britney Spears technically, but I'm very sorry."
Yeah.
And she didn't end up wearing it in the video. It was for what a song? I think it was called Three or something. She didn't wear it. It turns out her dancers had just gone and put it on and gone into LA and dancing around. Anyway, I digress. So yeah, I was very fortunate to join the agency when Fashion Week was still Fashion Week and British fashion was still, we were coming off of the back of like, I think the Queen had just passed, and it was still in that kind of era of British fashion was where the world was looking at in terms of its attention.
And what moment did you sort of realise that I'm actually playing at sort of a global level now? Obviously, when you grew up in Milton Keynes, it was very insular. Manchester became a big fish in a small pond. Now you've come to a global pond. What was that sort of moment like, or did you actually have that moment?
I did have that moment where I realized I was kind of playing with the big boys. So there were a few moments whilst working in this small agency where I was given the opportunity to scale up what I was doing. So when you first start out at a fashion agency, it's very much PR. So it's getting product in magazines basically, which is actually a bit of a regression from what I was doing before. But you've got to kind of start somewhere. But it was whilst I was at that small agency, again, this kind of confidence pushed me into situations where I was leading on accounts. Like I didn't have an account director, I was an account executive, and I was pitching ideas to these kind of global brands. And through that, I started to understand actually how these larger organizations work and what they need to facilitate operations within different markets, and how their global supply chains and sales work. So that really kind of got me, from a professional point of view, really interested in the kind of global game. And then it wasn't until I moved to the next agency, which again I was headhunted for, Exposure, which is a global comms agency. That's where I started to learn about, well, practice adaptation. So taking on these global brands like Levi's and understanding, how do we distill this very prominent global brand into a version of itself that's fit for the UK market? How do we adapt the messaging or create the messaging to a degree where it's slotting into our trends, our culture? Because Levi's, if we take Levi's as an example, means many things to different people across the world, as does a Dr. Martens, as does a Nike, right? In some markets, Nike's cool. In other markets, a lot of America, a lot of, Nike is mainly sells in outlets, in like big outlet malls, and it's not perceived in the way that we are. So, really understanding how we can take these global brands and make them work in the UK market was something that I really enjoyed. And again, I think because I was really passionate about that, the clients and the brands saw that and gave me a lot more scope. And again, I was working, I think I was an account manager and then became a senior account manager while I was there. I didn't have a director. I didn't have anyone above me. In fact, one of my clients, Original Penguin, I'm giving a lot of information away here. But I think the what do you call it? It's run out. The whatever's run out. I was in a meeting with Original Penguin, and I'd just done this amazing few campaigns with them. And they were like, yeah, so, when are you due for your senior account director promotion? I said, I'm not an account director yet. They said, pardon me. We thought you were account director the entire time. So I guess that goes to show, the level I was operating at and the confidence that I had. And I just really enjoyed it, that shift into understanding what global brands need, what they're made of, and that adaptation process.
Yeah. And with your work with, say, the Reebok global lifestyle campaigns, the Y3 shows in Paris, the talent-led projects Kendrick Lamar will come on to in a moment, it's sort of stuff on that surface level, sounds stuff of dreams. But behind the scenes, there's got to be a lot of high pressure and sort of some high glamour moments. What's that feel like behind the scenes? Because obviously you're just presenting that way.
I don't think I could sum it up better than you just did. That high pressure and high glamour is the two, they are the 2 points of which you're oscillating between all the time. And it wasn't until, after being at Exposure for a while, I spent a little bit of time somewhere else, but I ended up being a senior business director at M&C Saatchi Sports and Entertainment, which arguably is one of the world's largest marketing advertising agencies. Across the world, across the globe, and that is where I really did cut my teeth on, talking of inversion, that kind of local to global. So I was working on these global brands on a global level. Previously, I'd been kind of taking the as I mentioned, the kind of message from that global brand and adapting it for the local market. But in this role, I was working at a global level and doing that adaptation to then pass down to the local markets, which was really exciting. But it was a complete level up. To be in a room with a client, to have the trust of your client, a senior client, a Reebok, and to pitch them ideas, and then for that idea to come to life on a global level, to then have millions of dollars to be put behind it, and to see that play out in retail environments, TV spots, social campaigns, celebrities and talent talking about it. It doesn't really get any bigger than that. And of course, I then went to go on and work at Bestseller in the Lego Group, which is one of the world's top 5 brands. But for me, this moment was very precious to me in terms of the relationships that I formed. But again, it kind of represented, and not to kind of be the guy who looks at through rose tinted glass all the time, but it was really, at the tipping point economically as a country and as a world, where that money and that investment was there from brands to spend on, large scale activations, to really put money behind talent, to really invest in global campaigns and regional campaigns. Now it's become a lot more standardized, where you have kind of slight tweaks on a local level, whereas previously you'd be like, right, okay, here's the global campaign we're going to design, then we're going to create a global campaign for each regional campaign for each market. Whereas now it's much more, let's create the global campaign and let's tweak it. An example would be, often you see adverts on telly where they look dubbed, or there's a version of Ring doorbell that is constantly advertising on YouTube, and you can see the plug that fits into the wall is kind of CGI'd, and that's because they just simply swap that plug out depending on which market. So those little tweaks happen now, versus once upon a time you would actually create individual campaigns for each market. But yeah, some of the names you mentioned, really, to be sitting there, it was tough. If you want to work at an elite level, you are going to be working 12+ hour days. You are going to be, I think one week I flew to the States on like a Monday, got back on a Wednesday, and was told I had to fly back out on the Thursday, and work all weekend. It was high functioning, but the rewards were there. As I mentioned, as I used to say, on the back of a fag packet, a campaign with Kendrick Lamar. And I'll never forget, I just sent over the deck, which is like a presentation, over to the client in the US. I'd finished it maybe 9 o'clock at night, sitting in the office. And some of you may recognize this. The lights go off and you have to kind of wave to bring the lights back on. And I kind of sent this deck over and thought, right, okay, it's done. I'm flying out to shoot this in Silver Lake with Kendrick Lamar and world famous photographer Nabil. I go to get into bed at about 11:30 and you see the BlackBerry light flashing, and I look over and we cannot do the shoot anymore. We need to come up with the entire shoot concept now. So, I then spent the next 3, 4, 5 hours with the props person, production team, photographer, creating this new concept, getting the slides over to the US so they could agree, creating the PowerPoint presentations. Got to bed at maybe, I don't know, 4 a.m, up at 5:30 to fly to the US, straight to Hollywood Boulevard, down to Silver Lake, did the shoot. It sounds glamorous. To go back to what we were saying earlier, it was really intense. It's that whole back of house stuff. So that's that oscillation between the two. But I would not change it. The same could be said for a campaign we developed called Perfect Never, which was all about confronting these really toxic beauty standards that women constantly face. And we wanted to push this notion with Reebok that, there's no such thing as perfect. It doesn't exist. It's a construct. And we cast Lena Dunham, Zoe Kravitz, Ruby Rose, Gigi Hadid, as one other person I'm forgetting, and sorry if I'm forgetting you. And we created this amazing moment in New York. We invited the world's press to come down and really kind of dig deep and understand the concept of the campaign. And these kind of activations we were turning around on a weekly basis. I could keep listing them off, but it was really exciting. And at that stage, it was worth the bit. Risking it for the biscuit paid off.
Yeah. And I suppose people nowadays, everybody sees the shiny front end stuff and actually don't realize perhaps when somebody makes it look really easy. I think the Japanese call it natural ease is 10,000 hours to mastery or something like that. But you learn, say, if you go back to when you're 21, 22, 23, you're learning those high pressure stakes. I won't mention it again, the empty show or whatever, and you've learned from that to actually maybe get some incentives in. And then you can work a little bit harder when you build up with your different campaigns. You can bring all that sort of small failures that when you get onto a bigger thing, you're actually, I can miss that pitfall. And I've learned off that person because they've done it before in a different way. And then there is the old fashioned, you've just got to get your head down and work and prepare so something runs smoothly on the front end. Because let's face it, if you've got 6 or 7 people all in a room at once, you've got the media coming in, the press coming in, you've got to prime them, you've got to prepare them. You can't just wing it, because you're going to get 5 or 6 different conversations going and not the one that you want for the brand.
Yeah, you have to listen to yourself and you have to listen to your experience. You have to listen to others, right? You have to be able to be a sponge at any stage of your career. And truly, I think I can only speak for my industry, marketing, advertising. Seniority only really exists if somebody has the confidence to say, go left or go right, based off of their years of experience. There is marketing theory, there is all of the strategic and research and analytic stuff that I talked about earlier that is really important to build into your strategy and your campaign delivery. But you really need to have gone through those moments that you just run through to have that gut experience where you feel confident enough to say, we're going to hit go. And without going through those moments, you're unable to very quickly troubleshoot through, or just troubleshoot in general, and go through your Rolodex or your images in your mind of all the scenarios you've been through to then come to a solution very quickly. And that is, particularly from an agency side, that's really what your clients are paying for. So for anybody listening who is running their own agency and feels that they should be putting lots of time into creating decks and coming up with strategy and making things look really beautiful and compelling and integrated and all of these words that everybody is using. No, what the client is taking you on for is that moment when you were in the room. Yes, you might have done a pitch. Yes, you might have presented some ideas. They were buying into you. They're buying into the anecdotes that you were giving them, the experience about how you dealt with other situations, with other brands. Try not to lose sense of that, because that understanding that you have and that quick gut reaction, that's what they're buying into. And that's the thing that enables you to grow in this industry. It's not necessarily your ability to walk through all of the events that you've done, or, describe in technical detail how you delivered a campaign. That's all great. But if you can't demonstrate that you really have the experienced understanding of how to troubleshoot in real time and back up that decision, then you're not fully exploiting your value.
Well, you're still smoking mirrors then, not actually the real
Yeah.
McCoy, as they say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a great journey. Yeah, you are really good at this. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a very good arc there. Yeah, exactly.
Which is good. And then there was a moment that somebody called you Andy. Was it a famous singer with their clothing line? What was that like?
Yes. So you are going to the archives here. So we pitched and won an account, a very exciting account, um, to launch the clothing line of a very famous pop star titled Robbie Williams, formerly of Take That. He was backed by a group of investors who wanted to support him launching his own line. This was to fall in line with this kind of resurgence in his music career and this comeback. They took on board a former Burberry design director. So it had all the hallmarks of being, this is going to be a really interesting, and this was at the point where menswear in the UK was taking a shift from streetwear and conceptual and cultural into a very sartorial realm, which is where, you saw the rise of publications like Mr. Hyde, and GQ got really formal, and Murdochs were opening everywhere, and Ted Baker was doing a beauty line. It became very much about tailoring and suiting, and with a little bit of nostalgia mixed in there. The collection was developed, and we pitched for the business, and we won the client. And our remit was to launch the brand in the UK, in Italy, Spain, and a couple of other markets, which meant we had to go and launch in all the key markets. I'll cut to the end. Nowadays, you'll find Farrell, I think, is sold in Primark. We started off selling it in, I think it was Selfridges and Harvey Nichols. So that brand went on a bit of a journey. But I have some funny moments from that experience in working with Mr. Williams. The first of which is when a new collection is designed, often the sales team and other people working in the brand will go and view the collection, and we talk through each style. His management company is based in Shepherd's Bush is quite a small office, and inside this small office is a smaller room where you have maybe 15, 20 of us, and this small clothing rail where the designer's talking through the lines. Robbie Williams decides to pull out a cigarette and absolutely chain smokes in this tiny room. And I found it really interesting because no one was saying anything. People were coughing and nobody was saying a word. And moments like this played into why I do what I do now, because this hierarchy I'm just not down for. I never have been. I think that's actually plays into or is part of me being mixed race. Like, I don't like, I see things from lots of different sides. I don't like people feeling they're above anybody else or there's any kind of hierarchy to things. So it's funny to say, it was a funny moment, but actually looking back, it was not very comfortable or very professional. But he just called me Andy, despite the fact I would have many meetings with him. And again, that was a kind of, and this isn't unique to Robbie, by the way. This is a lot of talent, especially those that have been famous for a long time, just will never see you in their kind of bubble. But again, that was a really interesting brand to represent and launch. That was very adapted. So working with all of our key retailers, whether it was Brown Thomas in Dublin, or it was, I think it was like Coin in Madrid. So working with these independent, standalone retailers to launch this brand was pretty exciting and lots of travel. But yeah, it was a tough sell. I don't think anybody thought of Robbie Williams, I don't know about you, saw him as this kind of like sartorial, I want to wear what Robbie Williams is wearing. So it's in Primark now. That's all I can say.
And out of all of those experiences that we've just gone through, what do you think has possibly taught you the most about yourself, not the industry?
I would say it taught me about myself. I mean, I guess can I kind of frame that in a way, the advice that I might give to myself, a younger version of me?
Yeah.
I would say leave London before you become too soft. And I will give credit to Baz Luhrmann for interpreting or reinterpreting some of his lyrics when I say that. And I would say leave London before you become a little bit disconnected. Think, and this plays into everything that we're talking about around this kind of hierarchies or separation and indeed adaptation. Uh, I think living in London in particular, I think London's different from Manchester. Often when people move there who aren't from London, you kind of form this bubble around yourself and you reimagine yourself and you redesign yourself and you recreate yourself. And you do that to such a degree, you become detached from everydayness and everyday people. And you need that to be good at what you do in my industry. And that's why you see a lot of, or there's this general feeling now in particular, that a lot of brands aren't representing people, or their campaigns don't speak to people, or there's this elitism, or there's this media class, because people are forgetting who who the rest of the country is, or the rest of the world is, because you live in these bubbles. So I've learned that for a start. And I would say to anybody in my industry it's part of that piece of understanding culture and trends and individuals and communities. Um, you need to put the work in. You need to make sure you're not living in isolation because that will seep through into your works. Yeah, that would be one of my pieces of advice to a younger version of me. And then just in terms of anything else I've learned about myself, somebody used to say to me, a former boss used to say, Ryan, you work really well under pressure. And I used to wear that as a badge of honor. And it was only when I got older, I got into my late 30s, my 40s, I realized that was a tool to get me to do more, right? It's an incentive. You work really good under pressure. When your desk is stacked high full of work, you work really well. And kind of confronting that and realizing nobody should be in that situation. And a great thing I've learned about myself is I've now got this ability to like deconstruct a lot of these models and mantras and ways of working that I think were put on our generation, really. And I've realized it's all pie in the sky, just enjoy what you do, work hard, work hard, especially in the early stage of your career. Put the hours in. That's where you're really going to learn. That's where you're really going to develop. That's where you're going to make mistakes without having the risk. It's different if you make a mistake when you're a director of a company to when you're an executive. It's almost expected of you. So make those mistakes, learn, work hard, connect with people, look around you, keep a contacts book. That's one thing I did not continue to do. Another piece of advice, keep a contacts book. Yeah, but work hard, work hard.
I'd like to come back on to a bit you just touched on about brands are being a bit disconnected and not filling in that deconstructing bit there. That really, if you go back to your early part, you were on the cutting edge of, say, living on the ground, out with the guys in the denim, with the gang in Manchester, coming out and doing that. That then if now the brands and the marketing departments have become very, here's my safe window, you're almost creating, and not necessarily an ivory tower, but you're creating a block because you're going, this is what worked. Let's repeat it here. Let's repeat it again. But we just make a couple of subtle tweaks. It's a bit like going to a well-known decorating store and you can go, I'll have white paint. Well, there's 50 shades of white. There'll be 50 shades of blue. There'll be 50 shades, but they're all subtle changes. But actually somebody might go, I really fancy orange. Hang on, no, that's not in the blueprint. That's not what we do. But on the ground, culturally, everybody could be looking after orange, but no brands are doing orange. And it's quite interesting now that you can deconstruct and see, I suppose they almost call it like enlightenment, perhaps. You start to see the facade falling and you can actually see the real person or the real thing inside. And you then mentioned earlier on you were in Lego. What did that teach you? Like launching the first ever global campaign for them, that obviously working for an international company rather than a UK company, I bet there were some cultural differences there as well.
Yeah, so there are lots of things maybe we'll get on to talk about kind of this idea of kind of mining culture and what that looks like and how brands I think have been held to account at the was definitely started to see consumers holding brands to account and starting to ask them to kind of put their money where their mouth is. But my experience at Lego, yes, I actually prior to joining Lego, I spent some time working heading up comms for the Bestseller Group, which is at the time, the world's third biggest apparel company after Inditex and LVMH. It was huge. After leaving there in Denmark, I swore that I would never work for a global brand again. And then we no longer work for a consumer brand, and Lego came knocking. So you're not going to say no to Lego, are you? I mean, although in my interview, I said I preferred Playmobil. And yeah, believe it or not, I said when I was younger, I was into Playmobil, not Lego, because Playmobil was all about saving lives. You know, it was air ambulance, fire engines. You know, I wanted to be a saver, which I think probably got me, probably made their ears prick up a little bit. So yeah, working at Lego culture, Lego's actually, you've touched on something really interesting there, because Lego is a good example of doing a really good job of presenting, a global image to the world of what it's like to work in Lego. People say to me, "Are there slides at Lego? Is it like this? Is it some kind of like dreamland?" Funnily enough, there was a slide just before I joined, but it's not this. It's not this kind of like, the offices aren't kind of like this like dreamland where it's like free milkshakes and all this kind of stuff. It's a corporate office, in an industrial park in a small town surrounded by fields and pig farms in Denmark. It's a lovely town, but it's just industrial estates, really. So joining Lego, it was really interesting for me. I had spent a small amount of time at another Danish company, so I got a bit of a sense of the Danish culture. It too was a global brand, but it was again a fashion brand. So moving into Lego is a completely different kettle of fish. You're talking about, high efficacy with the brand. You've got people who like are super fans. Yes, there are people who collect fashion items, but Lego takes it up to a different tier. You've got the consumer segmentation of the Lego audience is very unique. You've got people like AFOLs, who are this community of super Lego fans all over the world who work in tandem with Lego to create new models, and they're not being paid. They're just super fans who will like test products. And so it just took everything up a gear, right? And my remit there was to launch the first ever global brand campaign. And for those of you listening who think maybe that's not a big deal, or Lego present loads of campaigns, Lego often promote their different sets, whether that's Star Wars or some of the passion points, which might be Lego for young girls or Lego for boys, but they've never really talked about Lego as a brand. So this was a big moment. And some of the key objectives of the campaign was to connect with low affinity adults. So it's those people who may have had a connection to Lego when they were younger, and as they've grown older, that love of Lego has kind of diminished a little bit. So from a marketeer's point of view, that's a really exciting brief. And we chose to approach that through connecting Lego to passions and the things that they love. But in terms of culture as a business, I mean, Danish culture is very interesting in itself. Before the call, we were talking about how in Danish culture, when you're doing a presentation, for example, people are almost willing you to make a mistake. And that's not a bad thing. They're trying to catch you out. It's more so they want you to be really vulnerable and really open. And I actually think that's something that we could adopt and we should adopt here in the UK. It's not about, being perfect and rehearsing. It's about just being relaxed. And so in those moments of mistake or stumbling, you actually win over a Danish audience. But what I found really interesting about this culture is I learned a lot about myself, to go back to your previous question. I'm not a company man. And I've tried to be for a really long time. I've tried to sing the theme tune, write the theme tune, but I just can't do it. I am such an agitator in those environments. I would be on panels talking about, plastic in the oceans. And I would say, well, we have to acknowledge that as an organization, some of our plastic may end up in the ocean, but then also those other companies that create cottage goods, they mimic Lego, particularly in Southeast Asia, that also ends up in the sea. So we're kind of culpable in that kind of way. And that kind of thing does not go down well for organization that is very, very, very rooted in its beliefs, very rooted in this idea or the two or three ideas and notions and mantras. So if you go against that, it can be quite difficult for you. And I found that this confidence I talked about earlier in my career developed into kind of this truth telling or this inability to kind of hold back. And I think sometimes, even now, nobody's perfect. I probably sometimes say things that I shouldn't. But again, I'm saying things based off of my experience and that kind of choosing to go left or right. So I found that, on the whole, I just found that I would just be very open and honest. And sometimes that hit well. And it meant that we created something, and I managed to convince people who were used to just going in a straight line to take a little left turn, and we would do something amazing. Sometimes it was taken the wrong way, and it was seen that I was confronting some of the DNA of the brand and wanted to change this like 100-year, principles or set of principles. So for me, that the idea of kind of coming to terms with I'm not a company man was the catalyst for where I am now. But I had a great time there. Obviously it doesn't really get any bigger than working for Lego. Lots of learnings to go back to that kind of global to local adapted approach. That's what I love. I was able to do lots of that. Understand about some of the challenges that a global brand faces in different markets. For example, the Russian market do not want to see people of color on their products. In the Arab states, when it comes to Lego, they want to open the box and Lego's made. They don't, this notion of like, what you buy something, you have to make it yourself. So that's all the kind of things that I love. And yeah, so from that point of view, it was a really, really interesting and fulfilling opportunity.
Cool. And after all the agencies, all the wins, some bruises along the way, and then the corporate chapters, you've now launched Intent. If we were to meet for the first time in one of these parties, how would you describe what Intent is, and what have you got the vision for Intent?
I struggle with this, Ian, because, it's all about creating the elevator pitch. But the truth is we do so many things. So I think it's easier to say we're a purpose marketing agency. But we were born out of my journey and all the things that I've talked about, and this feeling that brands and organizations just continuously culture mine, right? They're constantly dipping into underserved communities for ideas, for concepts. We've seen that with hip hop culture and brands, for decades. Fast forward to, luxury fashion brands designing trackies, taking this idea, taking this kind of this silhouettes of what young guys are wearing because it's all they can afford, and then whacking a high price label on it and selling it back. We see it all the time. So, I had 20 years of that. So observing that really was one of the reasons why, I thought Intent needed to be created. And our antidote to that is our own kind of mantra, which is ensure you leave the community more enriched than you inherited it. So this idea and this principle we take to any brand organization that we work with, and we say, look, before you do anything else, your primary objective needs to be giving back to these communities and actually engaging in a contract, which I consider culture to be a contract, right? Which is you can take out as much as you give in. So you can, of course, extract from culture and you can be inspired by culture, but how are you then feeding and nourishing and enriching that culture? And that's really important. And I think what we're seeing is consumers and just people are starting to realize the reality that the brands are taking from them and not giving anything back. And now you're seeing a lot of companies are now starting to damn, we've been caught out. What can we do? Let's put a little bit of money into this initiative with brown people, or let's call up, I don't know, an Asian hiking group and give them some product. It's all a bit retroactive rather than actually being part of their principles as a company and building that into their communications and their marketing. So that's what we like to help them do. And then as a kind of nuts and bolts of what we do as an organization, we do everything from representation. So we have this incredible department called Intent Labs, where we represent amazing talent like Reenie McGregor, for example, who's one of the world's foremost experts in diet, nutrition, athlete performance, hormone health. And she's really dedicated to helping athletes of all shapes, sizes, communities, backgrounds get barrier-free access to good healthcare when it comes to performance. She's also an advocate for eating dysfunctions. We also represent amazing people like Deo Kato, who's just run from South Africa to London, as well as representing some fantastic communities. I mean, we built a roster of outdoor sport wellness communities across the UK that's pretty unchallenged. So we tend to do a lot: brand campaigns, partnerships, collaborations. We develop internal training and workshops. You can see why my hesitation to label us under one thing, but we do it all, and it's really anything that helps organizations and brands be more representative and to give back to communities in a way that's actually meaningful and that will inevitably enrich those communities.
Well, I suppose, dissecting that a little bit more, it's not borrowing culture, it's respecting it.
Yeah, it's respecting and saying, we're inspired by this. We understand it. There's nothing worse than a brand or a company being inspired by something, but not fully. I could give you an example. It's not a brand example, but if you think there was a Coldplay music video many years ago that was shot in India, and that featured loads of different tribes and cultural practices in one space that would never happen, So it's that having the understanding, it's giving shining light on a community, but actually going further and having that respect and understanding the nuances and actually how to present them in the right way that's going to get the best response from them.
Yeah. And it's the smoke and mirrors again. Rather than getting everybody to fit in, who was it that was saying, rather than trying to get something to fit in a box rather than allowing the box to mold itself, or something like that, and go,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to fit in this box, but if we leave space here, or a bit of breathing space for people, like you say, if I was looking at that video again and was from one of those cultural backgrounds going, well, that would never happen. So you've already had that disconnect, which actually has got you further away from communicating with that, if that was your target audience, or if that was looking at the inclusivity of things. It's quite an interesting...
Allow that box to mold around the shape. Give that box the tool to, form that connection with the shape. And that's what we like to do. It's that, I know I've said this a few times, but it's look at how in life you can find those inversions, find those opportunities to look at things from a different point of view and empower communities to feel a sense of ownership and say, we want you, we don't want you, we allow you in, but you've got to do this, giving them that sense of autonomy.
And why is this mission so important to you, or so personal to you?
Well, I think there's a professional component and there's a personal component. I think the professional component is, what I've been talking about, observing throughout my career, this mining of culture and just feeling a little bit fatigued with that. It's capitalism. It makes the world go round, but I want to be part of the solution in the next wave, the next phase of what that looks like. So that is kind of the core business mission, I guess, at the kind of center of intent. But from a personal point of view, I feel that certainly when it comes to the inclusivity side, I think I've been fortunate throughout my career to benefit from some kind of privilege being mixed race. That certainly was prevalent in my early career. Although I didn't know a lot of the times that I was being put on cool accounts or streetwear accounts because of the way I looked. But then also at the same time, I was put on some luxury accounts where other people potentially wouldn't have been put in those places. And I've certainly been in rooms where, particularly when I was younger, Ryan's okay because his mum's white. I think people, whether it's the way I present or whatever, I've definitely noticed that. And as I've gotten older and reflected back, and seen some of the experiences of other people I knew in the industry and how far they've gotten and the experience they have, I'm like, right, okay. I was by no means immune to that. Although I didn't recognize it, I definitely was not somebody who grew up thinking about race at all. I'm very much aware of that. And I think part of this, the other, or maybe 30% or the 50% maybe of why I'm doing this, is to try and atone, I guess, for some of my inaction in a way that I think could be beneficial through my skills, right? I've tried to do it in other ways, like I think we talked about in the past. I launched a film called short film, and created a film and launched a film called Being Both, which celebrates people with mixed race heritage. I created a social campaign and platform called We Are Mixed Up, where we interviewed and celebrated people of mixed race heritage across social media. So I think I'm kind of a bit late to the game in that way, but everybody has to find their own way to do what they want to do in a way that's comfortable to them. And I think we've gone through this intense period the last 5-10 years where or not even 10 years, 5, 6, 7 years, where everything's become really intense. And we put everyone into little groups that become very focused on race and all of these things that are very surface level. Um, and I think a lot of people feel like I have to do something now, I have to do something really big. I have to like be part of a movement. I have to really, and actually you can be part of the solutions and make changes in a multitude of ways. It's the same way. This is a bit of a side pivot, but it's the same way we can make the planet nicer by not littering. You know, there are small things you can do in your life to help make the world a better place for the people. And when I talk about inclusivity, I'm not just talking about black, white, Asian. I'm talking about people who are disabled. I'm talking about people who are neurodiverse. I'm talking about people who are queer. I'm talking about everybody who feels othered. Uh, and I feel like this is my way of being part of that solution, whilst facing the reality of we have to make money, we have to live. So yeah, that they're the key drivers as to why intent is what it is.
Yeah. And let's talk about women in the open. And what did you learn about that survey, and what were some of the responses?
So we represent the largest cluster of women and girls who participate in outdoor activities. So we're talking hundreds of thousands of women. There's been more awareness of the levels of crime, harassment, and general danger that women face when they're accessing the outdoors, or indeed when they just step out of their front door. But for the purposes of women in the outdoors, we're talking about green and blue spaces and accessing nature. Something needs to be done. We are by no means the only ones doing this, or the first people trying to, there have been many communities, many individuals, but again, it's how can we be part of the solution in the way that, whatever way we can be. So as an organization, we launched the Women in the Open survey a few months ago, and our goal is to survey as many women as possible and find out what are these areas or solutions that are actionable that can be delivered to help make women feel safe. And we're only in the second month. I think we've got a couple of thousand people we've interviewed so far. Our goal is to get many more. We want to be really representative. Um, Perhaps you could add a link
Yeah, of course.
to this podcast as well, because it'd be really interesting to hear the thoughts and feelings of women. And you don't have to, by any means, be an outdoors expert or go cycling or hiking every weekend, because we know that statistically, women are, under threat continuously, unfortunately, by men in the UK and globally. So yeah, the goal of this is to really find out what their solutions are, and then take those solutions to government, to brands and organizations, and find ways to create that shift so the next generations of girls growing up don't feel so unsafe in the outdoors. And then to your question, some of the things that we hear that make women feel unsafe can be everything from a lack of lighting, to men being just irresponsible, and behaving terribly, through to there just being a lack of early years education that builds confidence for women. It's not necessarily just confidence to go outside, it's the confidence to be outside, knowing it's okay to have your phone on you, knowing to let people know where you are, knowing your route, all of these kind of things.
Yeah. And if we digress from this slightly, what actually makes a brand a brand? Not the pitch decks, not the values, but the real thing behind it. If you were to sum that in maybe a sentence or a couple of sentences, if it is possible.
So, no, it is possible, because I completely plagiarized one of my famous one of the most famous brand architects, and I'm a bit of a super fan, Philip Milokovic. A brand is not a logo or a name. A brand is a feeling. It's a shared experience. It's a moment that will live on within you. I can think of lots of examples. Lacoste for is one. I haven't worn Lacoste in 15 years, but every time I see it, I feel so nostalgic of my teenage years and the impact it had on me. So when people talk about, I'm a brand, this is a brand, that's a brand. No, you don't get to define a brand. A brand creates itself through memories, storytelling, shared experiences, moments, and cultures. I tend to give a bit of side eye and get a bit picky when people throw around this term brand, because it really does mean more than just a logo.
Well, it's again, like we were saying, the buzzwords and the actual actions that back it up.
Yeah, yeah,
Walking
yeah.
around fashion weeks is great, but actually there's probably going to be 4 days where you're lugging stuff, steaming stuff, empty rooms, picking up litter, having those awkward conversations with people going, I'm very sorry, but you have to sit in the second row. We've got somebody else coming to sit in the front row.
Yeah. Well, you've got to give it time to breathe. You've got to you don't just become a brand. A brand is formed. You've got to be a company, a label. You've got to be something first, and their brand is built around that. It's not just you launch to market and I'm a brand. No, a brand, your audience, your market, your consumers tell you if you're a brand or not. It's not something you can impose on yourself.
And if we zoom out for a bit of all the moments, the careers, the different pivots that you've had and all the insights we've shared, we've spoken about ego, privileges and being boxed in, or as you mentioned, even being the cool one rather than being taken seriously. What's some of the biggest internal shifts that you think you've made over the years?
And I like to think being a little bit less of a perfectionist. I think certainly growing up in the professional world, it was seen as, come on. I mean, when people used to go for interviews, you're like, I'm a perfectionist, but I can also, it was almost like a badge of honor to say, I'm perfectionist and I like to, make the thing. I spend too much time making sure things are perfect. And for me, that I would say that was true. And I think it was quite a toxic trait. And I don't think it makes you any better at your job, doesn't make you do things any faster, doesn't make it any more efficient. So being able to kind of unlearn that has been really important and has actually given me a lot of space to just find relaxation, a bit of peace when it comes to work. And then the art of saying no is something that I am quite preachy about. In fact, my other half gave me a list of things not to say on this podcast. Because it's a list of things I always say. I think I've done really well, but this might be on it. Yeah, this idea of, just feel free to say no. You're here once, no is a word that we are told to use sparingly, if at all, only in case of emergency. Well, actually, we should, it's okay to say no. When I came into my no era, I found that I was navigating the world more easily and, I was happier really. I wasn't, once you let go of some of that guilt, just saying, no, thank you, but no, thank you.
Well, you can say it politely. And I think this is a really interesting thing is boundaries. Is if you are aware of your own boundaries and you have a clear boundary, it's very easy for others then to go, right, that's where we go to. And then you're aware of what other people might try and project onto you, like the former boss. Ryan, you work really well under pressure and you wear that as a badge of honor. But actually, it's hard then to say, well, yes, I do, but I don't want any more work. It makes it very difficult to have that conversation. I think if we are more aware of our own boundaries, it's easier then to say thank you. Or if there's lots of meetings going on, well, can I ask what the outcome of that meeting is? And then you can choose whether you can say, yes, I'll attend or no, I'm not.
It's a great example, by the way. I'm going to steal that one. Consider that stolen.
Okay,
I'm going to use that one. Yeah, for sure.
What myths in your industry that you'd be happy to erase forever?
Oh, the whole, by the time you reach 25, you should be paid, your age. I will never forget just between 22 and 30, there are not too many like moments where collectively people start getting a bit stressed about their age, right? You certainly shouldn't be stressed about that age. It's the good times. But I remember getting up to 25, everybody that was my age in the office was like, if I'm not on £25,000 when I am 25, then my life is over and I will never get there. I will never get there. And this, and it just became quite toxic because I guess some people were and some people weren't. As you get older, it becomes less of a thing, but don't spend time focusing on that because it was never a rule. There are no rules about how much you should be earning at a certain age. You should be earning what your value is, and what your expertise are. But I think we need to get rid of this notion that I am 40, so I should be earning this much. No, does your experience correlate to that? And that's what I think people should focus on. So this whole myth of, age-related wage, I think people should move away from, because I think it induces a lot of stress and worry. And I think if you're at an age and you're doing a job where you're not earning as much as you think you should, then maybe go and find another job or go into a different area, rather than thinking it will simply improve because I'm getting older. Doesn't quite work like that.
Well, even then, I suppose it's then getting away from the ego. Okay, my ego says this. Actually, let's reflect and go, personally, I'm responsible for my outcomes. So if
Yeah.
I'm not getting the outcome I would like, let me think about it, maybe re-engineer or reverse engineer the outcome that I'd want to go, and be comfortable saying no to that opportunity, because there might be another opportunity that you can say yes to and be
Yeah.
for.
Yeah. And the other thing is, not everyone is good at social media. I say this is a real time, real world. If you speak to people in our industry, they will tell you finding good social media people is really hard. And that's because a lot of people think I have a social media account, therefore I'm good at social media. It's not the case. So yeah, I want to dispel that myth. And I was one of those people. Social media is not that hard. It's not that it's necessarily, there's there's necessarily kind of science behind it. But, there are formulas, and it takes a lot of dedication, and it takes a lot of understanding, a lot of time, and experience. And so I'm giving props to all the social media people out there. I know you get a tough time, but actually, when you're good, you are worth your weight in gold.
And again, it's having that value piece, but it's also probably learning, increasing your learning as quickly as possible, whether that's asking other people who are further along than that. But you would have learned that from your agency days by going, well, how do we hit the ground? What do we need to do to get there? You've just can take that system or strategy or whatever you want to call it, or life experience, and you go, I can apply it to this now, because it's the thing that I got taught by somebody once. They were looking for schools for their child, and they said, one of the questions I asked the principal is, how do you teach my daughter to learn, not be taught?
Mm,
And I sat with that for a while, and he said, well, if she can learn how to learn, she can learn anything. And
100%.
I thought, what such an inspiring and empowering way is, if you want to learn something, nowadays it's as easy as pie than 15, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. There are so many more opportunities to learn, to take advantage of.
No, I think that was really, again, you're dropping all these truth bombs here, but it's that whole idea around, in this country, certainly, we're very good at teaching people how to pass tests. We teach a lot of young people, but as you say, if you can, at a very early age, show the joy of learning and teach young people how to learn, how to open up your mind, how to be that sponge that I described earlier, then you open up so much opportunity, because the world opens up, right? So yeah, I agree with that at 100%.
Perfect. And if you could send one message to a listener that's wanting to start out, let's say, especially from an underrepresented or an overlooked background, what would they want to hear? Or if you were that person earlier in your life, what would you want to hear knowing what you know today?
Look, but don't stare. So look into that void of injustice or any of the isms or phobias, but don't let it drive you. Look into it, understand what it is, understand how you might deploy some of those experiences to your advantage, but don't dwell, don't build your entire value proposition around trauma. Certainly in my career, I'm often asked to go and do panels or speak about things which I consider to be trauma dumping, basically talking about my experience of being a mixed race man in the UK. I'm fully aware at the same time I'm still in like the top 2% in the world, being in the UK. It's very hard. You can pick through anything in life. Everybody's got a story. So look at that situation in life, observe that experiences, look into the void, but don't stare, and don't let your entire profession or whatever business you're starting be formed totally around those experiences, because the secret to business is being able to adapt and pivot depending on the needs of the market or the industry or what have you. So, and you can't do that if you're stuck to one thing. So yeah, look, but don't stare.
Look, but don't stare. And finally, what's next for you and Intent over the next 12, 18 months and beyond?
So for the next 12 months, so we've lots of exciting campaigns coming out. First of all, we're in planning phase with a few very nice brands next year. We've got some great moments working with some amazing communities. But in terms of where our focus will be for next year, we're looking to start working with more organizations on an internal front. So helping them develop internal campaigns, internal ways of working that help inspire those marketeers or PRs that we were talking about earlier that may be living in silo. How do we help them see the world more broadly and help them build that into their strategy and their thinking? So that's our goal for next year, doing more of that work.
Brilliant. And from that empty room to global stages, from Reebok to Lego and to Intent, from being boxed as the cool person to becoming the voice of culture, integrity, and real storytelling. It's been brilliant hearing your story and your journey. But Ryan, thank you so much for coming on 360 Life Stories.
No, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.